Ignite your imagination with fantasy sabers.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In Revenge of the Sith, Chancellor Palpatine executes Order 66, which begins the detonation of the Jedi and rise of the Empire. But amongst Palpatine's secret weapon of Order 66, there were 150 different contingency orders that he could have chosen from. So what if, instead of Order 66, Palpatine accidentally executes Order 99? Now we only know of two executive orders in canon, 66 and 65, so that means we get to have some fun and create our own rules for Order 99. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's start today's story in the Chancellor's office. Anakin Skywalker has just submitted himself to the dark side, and he moves to lead Commander Oppo and the 501st Legion against the Jedi. As Palpatine stands calculated at his desk, he speaks the words that he believes will end the Jedi. At this moment, Palpatine misspeaks. After decades of patience and careful planning, he almost throws it all away. Palpatine executes Order 99 and immediately recognizes that something is wrong. On the battlefield of Utapau, where Cody leads the 212th against the droid army, every single clone trooper suddenly falls to the ground, dead. Confusion races throughout Palpatine as he tries to contact Commander Green on Kashyyyk, but there was no response, as every single clone on the battlefield was killed. Order 99 is a contingency order that causes the clone's inhibitor chips to malfunction, and every clone is killed on the spot. This happened everywhere. Ahsoka was instantly alone on a ship coming back from Mandalore, cradling Captain Rex's lifeless body. On Coruscant, Anakin prepared the 501st with Commander Oppo to strike the temple. As Anakin orders them to begin the campaign, the entire unit collapses and Anakin's confusion surges. He immediately turns, heading back to Palpatine's office. The Jedi Council called an emergency meeting and discussed what happened. Every clone was dead, which not only meant they didn't have an army, but every single campaign across the galaxy would be lost. Kashyyyk, Utapau, Maigito, Cato Nemoidia all fell into the hands of the Separatists. An emergency order would sound, calling every single Jedi to return to the Jedi Temple. The only hope they had was working together. At the meeting, half of the council wasn't there. Anakin, Windu, Kit Fisto, Agen Kola, and Saesee Tiin. The council could sense their deaths. Something terrible was happening. This wasn't an accident. There was no way half the council would coincidentally die at the same time that the Republic lost every clone trooper. The council sat together stunned, struggling to comprehend what was happening. As for Palpatine, he would have to change his plans, his malfunction and mistakes. He hadn't expected this to happen. Anakin would return to his office, storming with rage. Anakin was both upset because he was delayed in his fight against the treacherous Jedi, but also because he just watched his friends and men die, and knew that this was every clone, which meant Rex, Cody, Jesse, everyone was dead. Palpatine calms his new apprentice, expressing to Vader that victory will still be upon them. Anakin was like a violent storm, raging and brewing. All he desired was destruction and chaos. He was a new man. The wide-eyed boy from Tatooine was gone, consumed by darkness. Palpatine tells Anakin that they still have the upper hand if there are no clones to oppose them. At this moment, reports had come in from all major conflicts across the galaxy. They were all victories. Victory was certain in this clone war. Palpatine tells Anakin that the droid army will begin their march towards Coruscant, and nothing will stop them from overrunning the Republic Jedi. Until then, it is their job to ensure that when the droids arrive, there is a peaceful transition of power. Palpatine goes to the Senate, where panic and fear is surging amongst the 2,000 present senators. Now, what needs to be understood here is that the war is essentially over. At least from a logical point of view. Millions of droids are momentarily arriving and will take control of the planet, and all of these senators are fearing what will happen to them. Some will be killed, some will be thrown in prison, others will lose their luxurious way of life. Either way, it's bad news for all of them. Their fear and discontent is showing, and they are looking for a place to put their anger and frustration. This is where Palpatine comes into play. He addresses the Senate and calms them as he explains the situation at hand. He expresses deep sorrow over the sudden loss of clones, framing it as an unexpected tragedy that none of them could have predicted. Senators begin clapping for Palpatine, still believing that he will be their savior. So there are a few ways that the scene could go, because this specific moment in the story will dictate everything that comes after it. Either the Jedi can try and rally support, and with the combined 10,000 of them, perhaps they can mount a defense against the threat on their borders, and maybe the Republic will be okay. But I feel like that story will just turn into a boring sequence of the droids coming, fighting the Jedi, and one side wins, and that's the end of the story. The alternative, and the one that I actually prefer, is Palpatine will be using the vulnerability of the Senators and the love that they all have for him as their leader, and use it to ostracize the Jedi. He tells the Senators that his spies and confidants in his inner circle have told him some unfortunate news, that it is the Jedi who are to be blamed for this outrage. Palpatine starts painting a vivid picture of the Republic on the brink of collapse, crippled by a war that had dragged for far too long, bleeding resources and lives with no end in sight. He reminded the Senators of the countless promises the Jedi had made: peace, protection, victory, none of which had been fulfilled. And wasn't it strange how the Jedi, with their mystical powers and vast numbers, had failed so miserably? How they, with all of their supposed wisdom and discipline, had allowed the Separatists to gain the upper hand. He spoke of their failure, not as incompetence, but as deliberate betrayal, weaving a tale of treachery where the Jedi weren't protectors but saboteurs, puppeteers pulling the strings to ensure the Republic's downfall. Palpatine didn't just accuse, but he reasoned. He appealed to logic, to fear, and to desperate need for survival. The war wasn't about victory anymore, it was about survival, and the Jedi had made their choice. They weren't on the Republic's side. He asked for the Senators to think about it, that the Jedi had 10,000 members, each worth 100 droids, and they couldn't win the war. It was impossible. They weren't fighting for the Jedi, they were orchestrating its destruction. Palpatine's manipulations surged, and the Senators fell right into his grasp, believing every lie he spun. The droids weren't the Jedi's enemy, they were their allies, their means to seize control of the galaxy. He admitted sorrow, even regret, that his office had uncovered this conspiracy too late. But now that the truth was out, they had a choice: act decisively, or let the Jedi destroy everything they held dear. It was a masterstroke. Fear turned into fury, and uncertainty turned into unity. Palpatine had masterfully turned the Senate against the Jedi. The Senate trusted Palpatine more than the Jedi. At this point in the war, even before the clones had been destroyed, the Republic were not fans of the Jedi. They believed they had been turned into soldiers and only fought for the sake of it. Palpatine, on the other hand, was revered as a hero and a savior, the best chancellor in history. Therefore, they all trusted his word above anyone's. And the Senators didn't just believe him, they needed to believe him. It was easier to blame the Jedi for their suffering than have to face the chaos of the galaxy head on. Palpatine had given them a scapegoat, and they took it. By the end of his speech, the room was electric with anger and resolve. The Jedi weren't guardians anymore, they were traitors, enemies of the Republic. And with that, Palpatine declared them outlaws. If they were found, they would be eliminated, not as heroes of the Republic's past, but as villains of the future. The Jedi at the temple and in the council chambers watched this with horror on the HoloNet. Something had to be done before it was too late. Obi-Wan says they can't let Palpatine get away with this. He is giving up the only hope for the Republic. Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi agreed. Palpatine had to be stopped. In the Jedi's mind, if they did what Palpatine had convinced the Senate of them leaving the Republic forever, then there was no stopping the Separatists taking control. Yoda says they need to confront Palpatine now, arrest him, and then go to the Senate and orchestrate the best defense possible. At once, the Jedi leave and go to Palpatine's office. Arriving, they find Palpatine standing next to the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker. The Jedi thought he was dead, his presence in the light was gone, and thus they couldn't sense him anymore. Kenobi gasped and asked what he was doing, but Skywalker was callous. He didn't reply. He simply smoldered at the Jedi and prepared for battle. Yoda says that Palpatine is under arrest and must come with them now. Sidious laughed. He told the Jedi it was over. He had lost. There is no stopping the Separatists' rise. This confirmed it in the Jedi's mind. Palpatine was working with the Separatists. But what they hadn't expected was Palpatine to reveal 2 hilts from his sleeves and ignite 2 crimson red blades. The fight begins as the Jedi leap at Palpatine and the clash of lightsabers echoing like a storm as Anakin and Palpatine face the Jedi. Yoda and Obi-Wan stood at the forefront, their blades a blur of blue and green, pushing back against Anakin's raw fury and Palpatine's deadly precision. Sidious unleashed wave of Sith lightning, arcs of crackling energy tearing through the air, only to be met by Yoda's mastery of the Force, absorbing it and redirecting the attacks in a dazzling flash of light. Anakin's strikes came like a hurricane, unrelenting and ferocious, forcing Obi-Wan to dig deep into his disciplined sorcerer, each parry holding back the fury storm of his former apprentice. Plo Koon joined briefly, his Force judgment clashing against Palpatine's lightning, creating a brilliant cascade of energy that lit up the battle. The room became a whirlwind of motion and power, the dark side and light crashing with thunderous intensity. As the fight pressed on, the Jedi began to find openings, their teamwork forcing cracks in the Sith's defenses. Yoda leaped with unmatched agility, striking Palpatine's blade aside and sending him reeling. As this happened, Obi-Wan outmaneuvered Anakin's rage, and a well-timed shot knocked his saber from his grasp. With a final surge of unity, the Jedi overwhelmed their foes, disarming Palpatine and subduing Anakin. The 2 Sith were arrested, and Obi-Wan was ashamed. He stared at Anakin with only pain and disappointment in his eyes. From here, Anakin and Palpatine are taken to prison and the Jedi go to the Senate. The Jedi entered the Senate chamber, the weight of what had happened pressing heavily on their shoulders. Yoda moved forward, stepping into the center of the room where Palpatine had once stood, his small form commanding attention amidst the towering pods of senators. He began to speak. Palpatine was the Sith Lord, the orchestrator of the Clone Wars, the one who had turned the Republic against the Jedi. He had manipulated events from the shadows, pulling strings and playing both sides until he stood on the brink of ultimate power. The Jedi had fought to stop him, risking everything to expose his lies, but their words were met with cold silence. Senators exchanged uneasy glances, and then the accusations began. They didn't believe it, not because Yoda's words lacked truth, but because the Senate's faith in Palpatine was unshakable, and as I discussed earlier, the Senate trusted Palpatine more than the Jedi. For years he had been their beacon, the man who guided them through crisis after crisis. To hear he was the enemy felt impossible. Instead, they saw the Jedi as desperate, grasping at straws to reclaim the power they'd lost. The voices grew louder, accusing the Jedi of treason, blaming them for the war, for the Republic's suffering, for everything. Before the Jedi could respond, alarms bared, sharp and relentless, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The noise echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, everything stilled. Then came the reports. Separatist ships had entered the atmosphere, and the droid armies began descending on Coruscant. Panic erupted as senators shouted over one another, scrambling to understand what was happening. The Jedi exchanged grim looks. It was too late. The battle they had been warned about was here. The Republic was woefully unprepared. Outside, the skies darkened, filled with the massive silhouettes of Separatist landers and swarms of droid starfighters. Fear swept throughout the chamber like a wave, silencing even the loudest voices. They had no choice now but to fight, to face the storm head on, even as the Republic they had sworn to protect turned its back on them. As the fighting fully began, chaos reigned on Coruscant. Explosions and debris filled the air, with Separatist fighters displaying zero mercy. The orders from Sidious was to destroy everything in its path. As Yoda and Kenobi worked together to rally the Jedi, they began their defense. There were 10,000 of them, and they would all be deployed. Thousands were sent to the ground and fought the droids head-on, deflecting their blaster fire and coordinating with the local police to ensure as much civilian protection as possible. Teams of Jedi were sent into the air, some in starfighters and others becoming infiltration teams to go inside the Separatist dreadnoughts. At first, the war was balanced and the Jedi had fought valiantly to set up a perimeter around the streets. But it wouldn't last long. The sheer number of droids continued to pour in. Where one was defeated, 10 would take its place. Each time a Separatist dreadnought was destroyed, 3 more entered the system. There was no stopping it. 1 million droids overran the Republic prisons and destroyed it to the ground, and in its place rose Anakin and Palpatine. They had returned, and regaining sabers from countless fallen Jedi on the ground, they entered the battle. Anakin's task was simple: kill as many Jedi as possible, while Palpatine moved to rally support from the senators and ensure that calm was preserved and that they would survive. The battle turned into a new kind of Order 66, but with droids instead of Republic clone troopers. And the result would be the same. Despite the fact that Jedi like Yoda, Kenobi and Plo Koon were on the ground, it wouldn't help the inevitable. Anakin single-handedly killed Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi and Sindralic, and with the immense help of the droids, the rest of the council were taken over. Yoda was the most difficult to kill, his small stature and agility making him a nightmare for droid blaster fire, and Anakin fighting wildly with anger and hate. But ultimately, even the Green Grandmaster would fall. As the battle slowly started to come to a conclusion, Palpatine goes to the Senate and stands in the center pod with Newt Gunray and San Hill. They explain that this attack didn't need to happen, that they could have discussed a peace treaty, but the Jedi wanted to use this as their chance to take control. But now, the Jedi are dead forever, and the war is over. Palpatine calmed his fellow senators and told them all that it was okay. They have negotiated a peace treaty with the Separatists that allowed them to remain in control and take a head position in the Separatist regime. Things will change, but for the better. The galaxy will become a safer place, filled with order and stability. Palpatine welcomes Anakin to the forefront of the galaxy and says the hero of the Clone Wars will lead the military, and with his enthusiasm, everyone will remain in places of power and safety will reign for all. Cheers sounded, not only in the Senate, but all across the galaxy as everyone watched on the HoloNet. The Clone Wars were over, replaced by a new galaxy order, one of peace and hope, or so everyone thought. From here, Anakin and Palpatine would subtly increase their control over the following years, until the idea of Palpatine working under the Separatists became obsolete. He was the Separatists, but it didn't matter, no one could ever stop him. As for Anakin, he would ensure that Padme successfully gave birth to twins and survive. But she hated what he had become, a villain, a murderer, and not the man she married. But she couldn't leave. She was forever burdened by his hate and anger. And so, Order 99 resulted in the same conclusion: the death of the Jedi and rise of the Sith. And now, as Palpatine's empire was established and secured, he would never relinquish control again. If you enjoyed today's video, you must watch What If Plo Koon Found Anakin on Tatooine, and What If the Younglings Turned Anakin Back to the Light. Please check out our saber shop, Fantasy Sabers, for the largest collection of replicas, Padawan sabers, and more. The link is first in the description. Thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.